Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mikey JPG, and welcome back to another video. Today in this video, we are going to be talking about Pearl Harbor, which is today, December 7th, 1941. It's the 75th anniversary today, and this is like my 4th or 5th time recording this part, because I messed up so many times. So anyway, we're going to get started. It says here, just before 8 a.m. on December 7th, 1941, hundreds of Japanese fighter planes attacked the American naval base at Pearl Harbor near Honolulu, Hawaii. The barrage lasted just 2 hours, but it was devastating. The Japanese managed to destroy nearly 20 American naval vessels, including 8 enormous battleships and more than 300 airplanes. More than 2,000 American soldiers and sailors died in the attack, and another 1,000 were wounded. The day after the assault, President Franklin D. Roosevelt asked Congress to declare war on Japan. Congress approved his declaration with just one dissenting vote. 3 days later, Japanese allies, Germany and Italy, also declared war on the United States. And again, Congress reciprocated. More than 2 years into the conflict, America had finally joined World War II. Pearl Harbor and the road to war. The attack on Pearl Harbor was a surprise, but Japan and the United States had been edging towards war for decades. The United States was particularly unhappy with Japan's increasingly belligerent attitude towards China. The Japanese government believed that the only way to solve its economic and demographic problems was to expand it into its neighbor's territory and take over its import market. To this end, Japan had declared war on China in 1937. American officials responded to the aggression with a battery of economic sanctions and trade embargoes. They reasoned that without access to money and goods, and especially essential supplies like oil, Japan would have to rein in its expansionism instead. The sanctions made the Japanese more determined to stand their ground. During months of negotiations between Tokyo and Washington, D.C., neither side would budge. It seemed that war was inevitable. The single vote against Congress's declaration of war against Japan came from Representative Jeannette Rankin of Montana. Rankin was a pacifist who had also voted against the American entrance into World War I. As a woman, she said, "I can't go to war, and I refuse to send anyone else." But no one believed that the Japanese would start the war with an attack on American territory. For one thing, it would be terribly inconvenient. Hawaii and Japan were about 4,000 miles apart. For another thing, American intelligence officials were confident that any Japanese attack would take place in one of the relatively nearby European colonies in the South Pacific, the Dutch East Indies, for instance, or Singapore, or Indonesia. Because American military leaders were not expecting an attack so close to home, the naval faculties at Pearl Harbor were relatively undefended. Almost the entire Pacific Fleet was moored around Ford Island in the harbor, and hundreds of airplanes were squeezed onto adjacent airfields. To the Japanese, Pearl Harbor was an irresistible target, a date which will live in infamy. The Japanese plan was simple: destroy the Pacific Fleet. That way, the Americans would not be able to fight back as Japan's armed forces spread across the South Pacific. On December 7th, after months of planning and practice, the Japanese launched their attack. At about 8 a.m., Japanese planes filled the sky over Pearl Harbor. Bombs and bullets rained onto vessels moored below. At 8:10, a 1,800-pound bomb smashed through the deck of a battleship called the USS Arizona and landed in her forward ammunition magazine. The ship exploded and sank with more than 1,000 men trapped inside. Next, torpedoes pierced the shell of the battleship, the USS Oklahoma. With 400 sailors aboard, the Oklahoma lost their balance, rolled onto her side, and slipped underwater. By the time the attack was over, every battleship in the Pearl Harbor, the USS Arizona, the USS Oklahoma, the USS California, the USS West Virginia, the USS Utah, USS Maryland, USS Pennsylvania, USS Tennessee, and the USS Nevada had sustained significant damage. All but the USS Arizona and the USS Utah were eventually salvaged and repaired. In all, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor crippled and destroyed nearly 20 American ships and more than 300 airplanes. Dry docks and airfields were likewise destroyed. Most important, almost 2,500 men were killed and another 1,000 were wounded. But the Japanese had failed to cripple the Pacific Fleet. By the 1940s, battleships were no longer the most important naval vessel. Aircraft carriers were, and as it happened, all of the Pacific Fleet's carriers were away from the base on December 7th. Some had returned to the mainland, and others were delivering planes to troops on Midway and Wake Islands. Moreover, the Pearl Harbor assault had left the base's most vital onshore faculties, oil storage depots, repair shops, shipyards, and submarine docks intact. As a result, the U.S. Navy was able to rebound relatively quickly from the attack. Pearl Harbor awakens the sleeping giant. Yesterday, President Roosevelt said on December 8th, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked. He went on to say, no matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory. I believe I interpret the will of the Congress and of the people when I assert that we will not only defend ourselves to the uttermost, but will make very certain that this form of treachery shall never endanger us again. After the Pearl Harbor attack, and for the first time after years of discussion and debate, the American people were united in their determination to go to war. The Japanese had wanted to goad the United States into their agreement to lift the economic sanctions against them. Instead, they had pushed their adversary into a global conflict that ultimately resulted in Japan's first occupation by a foreign power. On December 8th, Congress approved Roosevelt's declaration of war, and 3 days later, Japanese allies, Germany and Italy, declared war against the United States. For the second time, Congress reciprocated. More than 2 years after the start of the conflict, the United States has entered the World War II.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The facts of yesterday and today speak for themselves. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God. I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
Pearl Harbor eventually started World War II. eventually we ended World War II by turning Hiroshima from this to this. And we also did the same to Nagasaki. Eventually, after the nuke of Nagasaki, the Japanese gave up and we won World War II. So anyway, that is the end of this video today. So if you liked it, please click the like button. As always, I'll see you next video. Bye-bye!